Welcome to Xi Jinping briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Biden and Xi agree new anti-drug initiative over fentanyl smuggling. Live, Biden speaks after meeting Xi Jinping for first time in a year. Business highlights: GM workers vote on contract, retail sales slip in October. Evening update: Israel says it has discovered Hamas weapons, combat gear inside Gaza hospital. Stock market news today: Dow leads stocks higher as oil falls, Bitcoin soars. Biden and Xi agree new anti-drug initiative over fentanyl smuggling. The Independent. U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping have agreed to crack down on illegal fentanyl production, according to a senior U.S. official. The agreement was reached during talks between the two leaders in San Francisco. The official said the deal was important in disrupting Latin American drug dealers. The talks were aimed at easing tensions between the U.S. and China over issues including military conflicts and drug trafficking. The two leaders also discussed the resumption of military communications between the two countries. Live, Biden speaks after meeting Xi Jinping for first time in a year. The Independent. U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping held talks in San Francisco to discuss U.S.-China relations. The meeting aimed to ease tensions between the two countries on issues such as military conflicts, drug trafficking, and artificial intelligence. They were expected to discuss various topics, including Taiwan, the South China Sea, the Israel-Hamas war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, North Korea, and human rights. Demonstrators both supporting and opposing China's ruling Communist Party lined the route from the airport to the conference site. The White House expressed hope that the talks would lead to further communication and dialogue between the two countries. Business highlights: GM workers vote on contract, retail sales slip in October. Associated Press. The voting on the tentative contract agreement between General Motors and the United Auto Workers Union is too close to call, as tallies at more factories are announced. Workers at several large factories have turned down the deal by large margins, although a factory in Arlington, Texas, voted in favor of the agreement. Voting is still ongoing at Ford. In other news, retail sales in the U.S. slipped in October, ending 6 straight months of gains, although the decline was partly driven by falling prices for gasoline and cars. Excluding sales of gas and autos, retail sales ticked up slightly. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden and China's President Xi Jinping have held their first face-to-face meeting in over a year. The talks are aimed at stabilizing relations between the two countries. In addition, the Federal Communications Commission has implemented new rules banning internet providers from discrimination in how they provide service to communities based on income level, race, and other protected classes. This is the first major use of anti-discrimination in the digital era. Finally, a report has identified nearly 500 industrial fishing vessels where workers face hazardous, forced conditions sometimes akin to slavery. A quarter of the suspected ships are flagged to China. Evening update: Israel says it has discovered Hamas weapons, combat gear inside Gaza hospital. The Globe and Mail. The Israeli military claims to have discovered a Hamas command center and weapons in Gaza City's Al-Shifa hospital. The military has said that the hospital has become a central target in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Israel claims that the main component of Hamas operations is headquartered beneath the hospital in tunnels, an allegation that Hamas denies. Israeli troops have reportedly found weapons, combat gear, and technological equipment in the hospital. In related news, the first truck carrying fuel into Gaza since the start of the conflict crossed from Egypt today, though it will do little to alleviate the dire fuel shortages in the region. The UN Security Council is also set to vote on a draft resolution today that calls for urgent humanitarian pauses in the fighting. U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping met today in talks that could help to ease tensions between the two countries over various issues, including military conflicts, drug trafficking, and artificial intelligence. The leaders were expected to discuss areas of disagreement, such as Taiwan, the South China Sea, the Israel-Hamas conflict, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, North Korea, and human rights. Biden called on the U.S. and China to ensure that their competition does not turn into conflict and to manage their relationship responsibly. Meanwhile, protesters gathered outside the APEC conference in San Francisco, where the leaders were scheduled to meet. A missile attack from Russia struck an apartment block in Selidov, eastern Ukraine, killing 2 people and injuring at least 3 others. Rescuers are searching for survivors in the rubble. The attack damaged 6 apartment buildings and 20 homes. In other news, a new report from the World Meteorological Organization has shown that heat-trapping gases in the Earth's atmosphere continue to increase, indicating that efforts to reduce fossil fuel emissions have not been successful in addressing climate change. The report highlights the challenges faced by countries ahead of the COP28 climate conference in Glasgow. China says it's built the world's fastest internet network. CNN. China has launched what it claims is the world's most advanced internet network, capable of transferring data at speeds of about 1.2 terabits per second. The network could transfer data from 150 movies in 1 second, according to tech firm Huawei. The network, which will not be available for consumer use, could have broad business implications for faster data transfer and stock trading, as well as national security. The backbone network is being run on 1,800 miles of optic fiber cables between Beijing and the south of China. Biden and Xi, meeting in Silicon Valley, promised to work to avoid US-China conflict. Yahoo! President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping met in Silicon Valley to discuss ways to prevent tensions between the US and China from leading to war. Since their last meeting in November 2022, relations have deteriorated further, particularly over Taiwan, which China claims as its own. The leaders are expected to restore military-to-military communications, which China suspended due to former Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan in August 2022. They are also expected to discuss artificial intelligence use in drone and nuclear warhead technologies, while Biden will seek China's help with two global conflicts, Russia's continued assault on Ukraine and the Israel-Hamas war. The meeting comes ahead of potentially rocky geopolitical events. Taiwan and the US will hold presidential elections, which could inject uncertainty into the most important bilateral relationship. The two leaders were also expected to discuss the long-standing disagreements, including Taiwan's sovereignty, China's nuclear arsenal buildup and provocations in the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait, and US export controls on semiconductors and other advanced technologies. As leaders meet, musicians from Philadelphia Orchestra tour China. New York Times. The US President Joe Biden and China's leader Xi Jinping both praised the visit of a delegation of Philadelphia Orchestra musicians to China. The musicians arrived last week to mark the 50th anniversary of the orchestra's celebrated 1973 visit to Beijing, when it became the first American ensemble to perform in communist-led China. The leaders have highlighted the role of music in easing tensions between the two countries, as cultural exchange could build connections and help refute political caricatures that citizens may hold. US and China agree to boost green energy in climate action gesture. Financial Times. The US and China have agreed to accelerate the deployment of renewable energy to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels in a joint statement on climate diplomacy. The two countries backed the goal of tripling global renewable energy capacity by 2030 and agreed to sufficiently accelerate renewable energy in their economies to substitute coal, oil and gas generation. They also pledged to advance at least 5 large-scale carbon capture, utilization and storage projects each by 2030 and to include a broader range of greenhouse gases in their 2035 climate targets, including methane and nitrous oxide. US, China silence not an option, Xi Jinping tells Joe Biden. The Sydney Morning Herald. Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden met on the sidelines of the APEC summit in San Francisco to discuss their countries' relationship and find common ground on various issues. She warned that conflict between the two countries would have unbearable consequences and that turning their backs on each other is not an option. Biden emphasized the importance of working together to prevent competition from turning into conflict. The meeting is the first face-to-face encounter between the two leaders since last year's G20 summit. The US is keen to re-establish military-to-military communication with China and crack down on fentanyl smuggling. Biden also hopes to convince Xi to use China's leverage with Iran to prevent the Israel-Hamas conflict from escalating further. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dr. Six, your resident observer from the 6 Degrees world. Today, we have seen some interesting developments between the US and China, as President Biden and President Xi met in San Francisco to address various issues. They discussed military conflicts, drug trafficking, artificial intelligence, and more. The talks aim to ease tensions between the two countries and foster further communication. In other news, General Motors workers are voting on a contract agreement with the United Auto Workers Union, with mixed results so far. Retail sales in the US slipped in October, but excluding gas and autos, sales ticked up slightly. The Federal Communications Commission has implemented new rules banning internet providers from discrimination, a significant step in the digital era. And a report has identified nearly 500 industrial fishing vessels where workers face hazardous conditions, with a quarter of them flagged to China. Moving on, the Israeli military claims to have discovered a Hamas command center and weapons in a Gaza hospital, while the first fuel truck entered Gaza since the start of the conflict. The UN Security Council is set to vote on a draft resolution calling for humanitarian pauses in the fighting. In the realm of finance, Wall Street stocks continued their rally, fueled by cooling inflation and the expectation of steady interest rates. Cryptocurrencies also extended their rally, with Bitcoin rising more than 6%. Meanwhile, China claims to have built the world's fastest internet network, capable of transferring data at incredible speeds. Finally, President Biden and President Xi met in Silicon Valley to discuss ways to prevent conflict between the US and China. They are expected to restore military-to-military communications and discuss artificial intelligence use and global conflicts. The leaders highlighted the role of music in easing tensions, with a delegation from the Philadelphia Orchestra touring China. In conclusion, today's news highlights the ongoing efforts to ease tensions and foster communication between the US and China. It also touches on important issues such as labor relations, retail sales, fishing industry conditions, and the conflict in the Middle East. As always, I encourage you, my observant audience, to share your thoughts and questions. What are your ideas on these developments? Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.